single dad saved a woman from harassment on the plane, not knowing she secretly owned half the sky. The lights on the tarmac shimmered like lost stars as Jack Callahan guided his sleepy daughter through the jet bridge. Emily clutched his hand with one and her frayed teddy bear with the other, her small body bundled in a coat 2 sizes too big. She blinked slowly, her lashes heavy from the long day. "Almost there, sweetheart," Jack murmured, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. They boarded the red-eye flight last, as always, budget tickets assigned at the mercy of the airline. Their seats were in row 24, window and middle. Jack had no expectations for comfort. His only goal was to get Emily home safely. The plane's interior buzzed with the soft hum of air conditioning and murmurs of late-night travelers. Businessmen scrolling through emails, a couple arguing in hushed tones, a teenager chewing gum too loudly. The usual. Jack helped Emily into the window seat and settled beside her, shifting his broad shoulders into the cramped middle. The aisle seat beside him was empty until a woman slid into it, wrapped in a thick hoodie and oversized scarf. Her face was partially hidden behind large sunglasses despite the dim cabin lighting. She said nothing, only nodded slightly and looked out at nothing. Jack gave her the same courtesy. He wasn't the type to make small talk. Not anymore. Emily leaned into him. "Daddy, she smells like flowers," she whispered with a sleepy smile. Jack smiled softly and tucked the thin blanket over her knees. "Be nice, Bug. Everyone's tired." Just before takeoff, another passenger approached a tall man in a fitted suit, half-unbuttoned shirt, and the unmistakable scent of whiskey clinging to him like cologne. He frowned at the woman in the aisle seat. "You mind switching? I was supposed to be sitting here," he said, not to Jack, but directly to her. The woman froze, then shook her head politely. "I'm sorry, I prefer the aisle." The man's lips twisted in irritation, but he didn't argue. Instead, he slid into the row behind them, row 25A. Jack turned his attention to the window. The plane rolled onto the runway, the roar of the engines rising. Emily tightened her grip on his arm as she always did during takeoff. Once they were in the air, Jack relaxed slightly. Emily had already dozed off, her teddy bear cradled under her chin. That's when he heard it. "Come on, don't be cold," the man behind them said, low but unmistakable. Jack tensed. He didn't look not yet. "I'm just being friendly," the man continued. A rustle of movement, a forced chuckle. Then the woman beside Jack shifted away, her shoulder brushing his. He turned his head slightly. The man had leaned forward, one arm now reaching across the back of the seat, fingers brushing the woman's scarf. "I said no," she said softly. The man ignored her. Jack felt a familiar weight press on his chest. He'd seen this before at the base, in airports, in his past life. It was always the same formula. Entitlement, control, disrespect masked as charm. "Hey," Jack said quietly but with steel. She said no. The man looked up surprised, his smile twitching. "Easy, big guy. Just chatting. You're leaning over a stranger in the dark after she told you to stop. That's not chatting." The man's grin dropped. "What are you?" Her husband Jack turned toward him fully. "No, just someone who teaches his daughter what respect looks like." A few heads turned nearby. A flight attendant noticed the tension and approached her, face cautious. "Is everything okay here?" she asked. The woman in the hoodie finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I asked him to stop touching me." The attendant nodded, professional. "Sir, please return to your seat and refrain from further interaction." The man huffed, muttered something under his breath, but moved back. Jack exhaled slowly, trying to keep his pulse steady. He looked down at Emily, who had stirred but not woken. The woman beside him adjusted her scarf, still not meeting his eyes. "Thank you," she said, just above a whisper. He nodded once. "You okay?" She hesitated. "I'm used to handling things alone." Jack didn't press. He just leaned back and returned to watching the dark beyond the window, one hand resting protectively over Emily's blanket. For the rest of the flight, they didn't speak. But Jack noticed things. The way her hand trembled slightly when she adjusted her seatbelt. The way she kept her body turned inward away from the aisle. The way she didn't sleep, not even for a moment. She wasn't just tired. She was hiding. When the plane began its descent into Seattle, dawn was just beginning to break, painting the sky in pale streaks of blue and amber. Emily stirred, yawning, stretching like a cat. The woman stood quietly as they taxied toward the gate. She turned to Jack one last time. "You didn't have to get involved," she said. He looked her straight in the eye. "Yeah, I did." She smiled, small, almost sad, then turned and disappeared down the aisle. No name, no number, no hint of who she was. But something about her lingered long after the seatbelt sign turned off. As Jack slung his duffel over his shoulder and carried Emily in one arm through the terminal, he glanced once more toward the VIP exit. A black car waited there. A man in a suit opened the rear door, and for a brief second he saw her still wrapped in the same hoodie but standing straighter now like someone who had reclaimed her shape. She looked over her shoulder, and then she was gone. Jack didn't sleep that night, not really. After carrying Emily up the narrow stairs to their third-floor walk-up, he tucked her in under their threadbare quilt, brushed the hair from her forehead, and just watched her breathe for a while. He didn't know why the flight haunted him. Maybe it was the way the woman vanished without a trace. Maybe it was how familiar her fear looked even when she tried to hide it. Or maybe it was the fact that he saw his late wife in her quiet strength, the way she held herself together, while the world tried to unravel her. He sat at the kitchen table nursing a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, staring at the city lights through a cracked window pane. Outside, the soft rain of a Seattle dawn washed over the sidewalks like forgiveness. At 6 a.m., he changed into his uniform, grease-stained cargo pants, steel-toed boots, and a faded hoodie with his old Air Force patch stitched into the sleeve. He had a shift at the regional maintenance hangar by 7. Emily would spend the day with Mrs. Connors, their downstairs neighbor, retired schoolteacher, widowed and fiercely protective of Emily like she was her own. As he leaned down to kiss Emily's forehead before leaving, she murmured, "Did she get home safe?" He paused. "Who bug? The flower lady." Emily said, barely awake, "The one who smelled like roses." Jack's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Yeah," he whispered, "she got home just fine." That morning, while tightening a hydraulic line beneath the fuselage of a grounded commuter jet, Jack caught himself glancing toward the tarmac too often. Like somehow some version of her might step down from one of those sleek planes again. But all that arrived were tired businessmen yawning flight crews in the same corporate shuttles. It wasn't about her. It was the way her silence spoke louder than her words. The way she'd said, "I'm used to handling things alone." That line lingered in him like smoke after a fire. He'd known that feeling. Years ago, when his wife Megan was diagnosed, he'd tried to be her rock-strong calm, composed. But some nights, when her pain silenced even her tears, he'd slipped out to the porch and sat in the cold hands, shaking, not sure if he could hold it all together. He'd learned then that even the strongest people cracked when no one was watching. And that was what unsettled him most about the woman on the plane. She hadn't cracked. Not once, but her eyes had begged for space. That afternoon, while Jack was rechecking tire pressure on a domestic 737, his supervisor walked by with a clipboard. "Hey, Callahan," the man barked. "Got a few hours next week to spare." Jack straightened. "Depends. Training seminar coming up. Corporate wants us to prep for a passenger safety initiative. Cultural conduct, interpersonal awareness, all that HR fluff." Jack raised a brow. "Didn't know we were flight attendants now." "Yeah, well, this one's not optional. Word is it's backed by someone big. New fund, new vision. Some exec from the top wants real stories from the field." Jack sighed. "Sure, I'll sit through it." The supervisor nodded and walked off, leaving Jack squinting toward the hangar entrance. He didn't know why, but something inside him stirred. That night, Jack and Emily shared grilled cheese sandwiches at their little kitchen table. Emily, legs dangling from the chair, chattered about her day with Mrs. Connors. She said, "I'm getting good at reading aloud," Emily beamed. "I read Charlotte's Web with voices and everything." Jack smiled genuinely. "That's my girl." Then she grew quiet. "Daddy, why was that man on the plane so mean to the flower lady?" Jack hesitated. Sometimes people don't know how to be kind. Or worse, they don't care. Emily looked at him seriously. "But you care." He looked into her eyes, Megan's eyes, and nodded. "Always." She leaned in, whispering, "You were like a knight, but without a horse." Jack chuckled. "I'll get a horse eventually." Emily giggled. Then her voice dropped. "Do you think she's lonely?" He didn't answer right away. Maybe he said finally. But sometimes the loneliest people are the ones who look like they're doing just fine. Emily thought about that a long moment, then quietly asked, "Can we write her a letter?" Jack looked up surprised. "We don't know her name, honey." Emily tilted her head. "But we know her heart." Right. It hit Jack harder than expected. He pulled her into his lap, held her close, and said softly, "You know, Bug, you're going to change the world someday." She yawned, leaning into him. "Only if you come too." Later that evening, after Emily had gone to bed and the apartment was quiet again, Jack sat alone with an envelope. It was blank. He wrote nothing. But he held the pen, stared at the page, and thought about the woman who didn't look back. She hadn't needed him. But for a brief, quiet moment he'd made her feel safe. And in a world that rarely offers that to anyone, let alone women like her, that meant something. He didn't know who she was, but he knew what she was worth, even if the rest of the world hadn't figured it out yet. And somewhere else in a suite high above the city skyline, Ava Linwood stood at a glass wall overlooking Seattle. She still wore the same hoodie from the flight, her phone buzzing with unread messages. Her assistant knocked gently. "Ms. Linwood, the board's requesting a response on the shareholder proposal." "I'm not ready," Ava said, her voice low. The assistant hesitated. "You've never said that before." Ava turned her eyes softer than usual. "That's because this time I'm not pretending." She pulled Emily's forgotten teddy bear ribbon from her pocket. She'd kept it. She didn't know why, but something about that flight. Someone had seen her. Not as Ava Linwood, CEO of Luma Air, not as an heiress or a brand, just as a woman. And that for the first time in years had made her feel real. The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. Seattle's sky had always had a weight to it, soft, gray, heavy with unshed tears. Jack stood under the hangar awning, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of cheap coffee, watching droplets slide down the windshield of a Cessna 206 like racing nerves. It had been 3 days since the flight, 3 days since the woman in the hoodie, 3 days since Jack had felt something shift beneath the surface of his otherwise predictable life. He couldn't explain it. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't fantasy. It was more like resonance, like 2 notes in the same chord vibrating from opposite ends of a piano. She didn't ask for help, and he hadn't tried to be anyone's hero. But in that shared silence, something unspoken had passed between them, and it refused to leave him. "Callahan," a voice barked behind him. Jack turned as his supervisor Dale approached with his usual impatient gait and a clipboard in hand. "You're on break, or holding a vigil for that windshield." Jack smirked lightly. "Multitasking." Dale handed him a folded memo. "You're scheduled for the corporate workshop next week. That thing I mentioned, passenger safety, public relations, don't be a jerk in the sky kind of deal." Jack unfolded the page. The heading read, "Safe Skies Initiative, Pilot Program Training." Under it, lead facilitator, Ava Linwood, CEO, Luma Air Group. Jack's breath paused. Ava. Of course. He stared at the name, feeling the memory of her voice, her stillness on the plane rush back through him. The way she had stood at the car outside the terminal, glancing over her shoulder like she was about to step back into a world she didn't belong in anymore. "She's some big shot?" Jack asked, feigning casual. Dale shrugged. "Luma Air's new head. Young, loaded, unpredictable. Canceled her engagement to some billionaire hedge fund punk and vanished from the media for 2 months. Now she's suddenly on a values kick, probably trying to fix her image. Jack nodded, though something about that explanation rang hollow. He remembered her differently. She hadn't seemed calculated. If anything, she looked like a woman running from the very life everyone assumed she loved. "Why me?" Jack asked. Dale tapped the clipboard. They wanted mechanics who've had field interactions with passengers. "Authentic voices," they said. "You intervened in that incident last week, remember? HR flagged it as exemplary." Jack raised an eyebrow. "So, now I'm exemplary," Dale chuckled. "Don't get used to it." That night, Jack stood in front of the mirror in their tiny bathroom, trying to make a button-down shirt look like it hadn't been folded since last year's funeral. Emily sat cross-legged on the closed toilet lid chin, propped on her hand, watching him. "Is it a date?" she asked innocently. Jack gave her a mock glare. "No, but you're ironing. You never iron. It's a training meeting, not a prom." Emily's eyes twinkled. "Maybe the flower lady will be there." Jack paused at the mirror. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Emily slid off the lid and wrapped her arms around his waist. "If she is." "Can you tell her I liked her?" Quiet, Jack looked down. "You liked her, Quiet." Emily nodded against his side. "Some people talk too much." She didn't have to say anything. She just felt kind. Jack swallowed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You felt that she held her breath a lot, like Mama used to when she was trying to be brave. Jack knelt. "You're really good at noticing things you know," that Emily grinned. "I learned from the best." The next morning, the Luma Air corporate office was nothing like Jack expected. It wasn't glass and chrome coldness. It was warmth, sleek, modern, but soft. Natural light. Real wood. No pretension. There were framed photos of passengers hugging flight attendants, drawings from kids thanking pilots, notes from elderly passengers praising patience and dignity. It didn't feel like a business. It felt like someone had tried to build a company out of grace. Jack sat in the third row of a small presentation hall. He hadn't been in a suit since Megan's funeral. His boots were still scuffed, but he'd tried. Emily had even tucked a lucky penny in his pocket before he left, whispering, "In case you forget how special you are." The room dimmed. The screen came to life. Then she walked in. No hoodie, no scarf, no sunglasses. Just a woman in a fitted navy suit, heels low but confident hair, tied back face, open and unguarded. But Jack knew her instantly. His breath hitched not because she looked different, but because she looked real. Ava Linwood. She scanned the room as she stepped onto the small stage. Their eyes met, and for a second something flickered. Recognition. Surprise. A question unasked. But she said nothing. Instead, she spoke to the room. And it wasn't corporate. It was human. "I'm not here to talk about brand. I'm not here to sell a slogan. I'm here because a week ago I was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's colleague, someone's CEO, and none of those titles protected me from a hand on my arm that I didn't want. What protected me was a stranger who decided that silence wasn't acceptable." Jack stared. "I never got his name," she continued. "He didn't ask for mine. And yet, I've thought about that moment more than I've thought about any of my press releases in the last 5 years." The room was silent. She breathed in. Safe skies isn't about rules. It's about culture. About kindness that speaks when someone can't. About strength that protects without demanding anything in return. Her gaze swept over the audience again. For a moment it landed back on Jack, and this time her eyes lingered. Then she said softly but clearly, "Sometimes the person who saves you doesn't even know he did." Jack looked down. The lucky penny burned warm in his pocket. Jack stayed in his seat after the presentation ended. Attendees filtered out slowly, some murmuring praise, others still quiet as if processing the weight of what Ava had said. He wasn't surprised by the impact of her words. What surprised him was how calm and clear she had been while sharing something so personal. She hadn't stuttered. She hadn't looked away. But in her stillness, Jack had sensed it again, that quiet ache beneath the surface. The same silence she'd carried on the plane, like she was standing tall in a storm no one else could see. He didn't go up to her, didn't make a scene, just left his seat, found the elevator, and made his way down to the parking lot, the sound of his boots echoing down the empty corridor. Back home, the apartment smelled like grilled cheese and crayons. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, coloring beside a pile of open books. Mrs. Connors had left a note. She's an angel, as always. Left her reading to a stuffed lion while eating apple slices. You're raising a heartbreaker, Jack. Jack smiled at that. Emily ran to greet him. Was she there? She asked immediately. The flower lady Jack hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, she was. Emily's eyes sparkled. Did she see you? I think so. Did she remember you? Jack paused again. She didn't say anything. But I think she did. Emily looked thoughtful for a moment, then returned to her drawings. I hope she knows you're the best daddy. Jack ruffled her hair. I think she saw enough to get the idea. That night, long after Emily had fallen asleep, Jack found himself sitting at the tiny kitchen table again. His laptop sat open in front of him, the soft glow casting shadows on the peeling linoleum countertop. He wasn't usually one for social media or corporate websites, but tonight curiosity crept in like a tide he couldn't hold back. He searched Ava Linwood CEO Luma Air, and there she was. Not the woman in the hoodie, not the nervous passenger, but the public figure flashing smiles at ribbon cuttings, shaking hands with dignitaries standing at conference podiums in tailored suits. One article titled, Her the Youngest Queen of the Skies. Another, Linwood takes the helm from heiress to industry disruptor. Jack scrolled slowly. A video began autoplaying a clip from a morning show interview just a few months old. The interviewer asked, What do you say to those who think your rise to power was inherited, not earned? Ava had smiled politely but firmly. I didn't choose my last name, but I choose every decision I make, and that includes refusing to be defined by anyone else's expectations. Even on screen, she spoke with purpose. But Jack saw it now, the flicker behind her eyes. The cost of caring so much while pretending it was weightless. Another clip, another article, and then one headline that made him sit up straighter. Linwood breaks engagement, withdraws from public eye. The piece was vague, speculative, sources close to her cited irreconcilable personal values, but gave no further comment. Just a picture her standing alone at a gala champagne, untouched expression, unreadable. Jack leaned back, folding his arms. So she had vanished, like she'd stepped off the carousel and refused to climb back on. And somehow in that detour she'd ended up on a red-eye flight next to a single dad and his sleepy daughter. He didn't know what she was running from, but he recognized the look in her eyes, the one that said, I'd rather be no one for a little while just to remember who I am. The next day, while Jack was inspecting the landing gear of a grounded regional jet, his supervisor's voice crackled through the radio, clipped to his belt. Callahan office. Linwood wants to see you. Jack blinked. Sorry what you heard me. Corporate's still here. She asked for you by name. He didn't have time to overthink. Just wiped the oil from his hands, straightened his shirt, and walked across the tarmac. Ava's makeshift meeting space was a corner conference room lined with tall windows and clean white walls. She stood near the far end, hands folded neatly, posture relaxed but alert, like someone used to guarding herself in every room she entered. She looked up when he walked in. Mr. Callahan, she said. Thank you for coming. Jack nodded, staying by the door. Didn't know I had a choice. Ava smiled slightly. You always do, but I'm glad you came anyway. A pause, then she gestured toward a chair. May I? Jack took the seat. You remembered me. Of course I did. Another pause. She leaned forward just slightly. "I didn't thank you. On the plane." Jack shook his head. "Didn't do it for thanks." "I know," she said quietly. "That's why it meant something." They sat in silence for a beat. Then Ava spoke again, slower this time, more deliberate. "I was scared that night. Not of the man. I've dealt with worse. But of how normal it felt to freeze. To say nothing. To expect nothing." Jack listened. "And then you stood up," she continued. "Not because you knew who I was. Not because you wanted anything. Just because it was the right thing to do." He looked her in the eye. "I didn't think. I just looked at my daughter sleeping and thought, if it were her, I'd want someone to stand up." Ava's face softened. "I envy that," she said. "That clarity. I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who only act when it benefits them." Jack shrugged. "Maybe that's why we miss the simple things." She smiled again this time, more genuinely. "I want to offer you something," she said. "A role." Jack blinked. "I'm not looking for a job." "I know. But this isn't just a job. It's a chance to help shape something bigger. The Safe Skies initiative, it can't just be a PR move. It has to mean something. I want real people like you to help build it." Jack stayed silent. "I won't dress it up," she added. "It'll be messy, frustrating, maybe even slow, but it will matter." He exhaled slowly. "I have a daughter." "She's the reason I'm asking." Ava said, "Because she saw you do the right thing without knowing anyone was watching. That's who I want leading this." Jack leaned back. He didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in a long time, something in him stirred. Not duty, not routine, possibility. And maybe something else too. Jack hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no either. For a man who spent most of his days turning bolts and running diagnostics on engines, ambiguity wasn't his comfort zone. Machines followed rules, equations. When something broke, you found the cause and fixed it. Simple. But people were a mess of memory and hesitation and wounds they didn't talk about, and Ava Linwood, as polished as she appeared, was no exception. He had walked out of that conference room with her offer echoing in his head like a song you try to forget but keep humming anyway. She wanted him to lead something real, to be more than just another name on a payroll, and Jack, despite himself, was tempted. Still, temptation wasn't decision. He had a daughter to raise, a life to manage. He couldn't just leap into someone else's cause, no matter how noble. That night, while Emily built a blanket fort in the living room and demanded it be called Castle Braveheart, Jack stood in the kitchen staring at the envelope that had been sitting in his coat pocket since the day before. It was small, handwritten, no stamp, just "To the lady on the plane," from Emily. He'd found it the morning after the seminar tucked behind her sketchbook. He hadn't opened it. It wasn't his to read, but tonight something told him he needed to. "Dear Flower Lady, my name is Emily. You sat next to me and my daddy on the plane. I don't know your name, but I liked your scarf and the way you were quiet like my mom used to be when she was thinking a lot. Thank you for smiling at me. I hope you're okay. My daddy protected you. That's what he does. He says real bravery is being kind even when nobody claps. If you're sad, I hope you find someone to sit next to you who makes you feel safe too. Love, Emily Callahan, age 7 and 3 to 4. Jack read it once, then again. The second time he had to blink twice to see clearly. He sat at the table, the letter trembling slightly in his calloused hands. Emily had never met Ava as a CEO or as a public figure. She saw her only as a person, a quiet stranger who smelled like flowers and seemed like she might be trying hard not to fall apart. And somehow his daughter had put into words what Jack hadn't been able to say out loud. It wasn't about joining a corporate initiative. It wasn't about a job. It was about showing up again and again for people who didn't expect it, but deeply needed it. He looked toward the living room where Emily had fallen asleep inside her castle, one arm still clinging to her teddy bear. The fort's ceiling sagged slightly where she'd tried to hang it from a bookshelf. He smiled, then stood up and picked up the envelope. The next morning, Jack drove to the Lumiere Tower not because he had decided, but because some decisions aren't made with certainty. They're made with conviction. The receptionist blinked in surprise when she saw him. "Mr. Callahan, I'm here to see Ms. Linwood. She didn't have you on her calendar today." "I'm not here for a meeting," he said, holding up the letter. "Just wanted to drop something off." The receptionist took it carefully. "I'll make sure she gets it." Jack nodded and turned to go, but he hadn't made it to the door before he heard footsteps. "Jack." Ava stood just outside the elevator bank jacket slung over one arm, hair pulled back in a loose braid that made her look younger, softer. Less CEO, more human. He turned. "Didn't know you were around. I was just heading out. I saw your name on the visitor log." They stood for a beat. He held out the envelope. "She wrote this. I think it's yours now." Ava took it, eyes scanning the childish handwriting on the front. Her fingers tightened around it, but she didn't open it right away. Jack cleared his throat. "She's good at seeing people. Has this way of knowing what's real." Ava nodded slowly. "She's a lot like you." "Too good for me," more like he said with a half smile. "I haven't decided yet. I didn't expect you to. I just wanted you to consider it." "I am." "Not because I asked," she added. Jack shook his head. "No, because you didn't ask like everyone else does." She looked down at the envelope again. "Can I show you something?" He hesitated, then nodded. They rode the elevator to the top floor. Ava led him through a quiet hallway past her office to a glass room with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound. But what stopped Jack wasn't the view. It was what covered the walls. Letters, drawings, emails printed out and taped up, notes from passengers, staff, survivors, apologies, thank yous, hundreds of them. At the center of the wall, in thick red letters, "This is who we serve." Ava stood beside him quietly, watching his reaction. "I built this when my father died," she said. "Everyone thought I'd take over because I was next in line, but I didn't want to inherit something cold. I wanted to remember that this business is about people, about stories, about chances." Jack stared at the walleyes, catching on one letter from a mother who wrote, "Your pilot walked my elderly father to his seat and didn't let go until he smiled. I will never forget that." "I lost that for a while," Ava said softly. "Got caught in boardrooms and bottom lines, until a stranger stood up on a plane and reminded me why I wanted to be here in the first place." Jack turned to her. She finally opened the envelope and read Emily's letter. Her throat tightened, and then, without a word, she reached into her purse and handed Jack a small card. On the back, scribbled in ink, no titles, no suits, just people. "Let's build something honest." Jack tucked the card into his wallet, then smiled. "All right," he said. "Let's build it." The first day of training didn't begin in a boardroom. It began at a gate. Gate C12, to be exact, one of the busiest in SeaTac, where parents juggled strollers and carry-ons, businessmen talked too loud on Bluetooth earpieces, and teenage travelers huddled with headphones disengaged from the world around them. Jack stood by the terminal window in his crisp Luma Air polo, scanning the room not for safety risks, but for the invisible things. The uneasy glances, the hesitation in someone's step, the kinds of cues only someone who'd once felt helpless knew how to spot. Ava had insisted that if they were going to build a culture of safety, it had to start here, not with a script or a slide deck, but with people in real time. He heard footsteps behind him. "First day nerves?" Ava asked lightly. Jack glanced sideways. "I faced down an engine fire with nothing but a wrench and duct tape. This is worse." She smiled. "That's because you're not hiding behind a job anymore." He smirked. "Is that what I was doing? We all do, until someone calls us out." They both stood in silence for a moment, watching a young mother trying to calm her screaming toddler. Jack stepped forward, crouched beside the boy, and with a gentle smile held out a small plastic toy plane from his pocket, one Emily had given him that morning in case someone needs cheering up. The boy blinked, then reached out. The crying stopped. The mother looked like she might cry herself, but instead mouthed a silent thank you. As Jack returned to Ava's side, she whispered, "Do you even realize what you just did?" He shrugged. "Kid needed a break. I had a plane." She shook her head, almost awed. No handbook can teach that. Later that afternoon, they returned to the training center where a group of new hires sat waiting flight attendants, gate agents, ground crew, all handpicked for a pilot program Ava was calling the Culture Crew. Jack stood beside her as she addressed the room. "This isn't compliance." Ava began, voice calm but firm. "This is compassion. It's not about avoiding lawsuits. It's about making sure every person who walks onto one of our planes leaves with more dignity than they arrived with." Then she stepped back. "All of that sounds good on a poster," she said. "But today you're going to hear from someone who doesn't speak in posters." Jack blinked as she motioned to him. He hadn't prepared remarks. He hadn't even expected to speak. But something in Ava's expression said, "This isn't for them. This is for you." So he stepped forward. "My name's Jack Callahan," he said simply. "I fix planes. That's what I've done for most of my adult life. I've also raised a little girl alone since my wife passed 5 years ago." The room quieted. "A week ago, I got on a plane with my daughter. We were tired. We were flying cheap, just trying to get home." He paused. There was a woman sitting beside us, quiet, keeping to herself. A man behind us didn't like being told no. He kept pushing, crossing lines. Jack looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. I didn't plan to get involved. I didn't think I'd change anything. But my daughter was watching, and I remembered something I used to believe, that the most powerful thing a man can do isn't to control or shout or posture. It's to protect. A breath passed through the room. And not just the people we love, but strangers, anyone. Because safety shouldn't be earned. It should be a given. He looked toward Ava, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That woman on the plane didn't say much. But later, I found out she could have bought the plane we were on 10 times over. And still. She sat there alone, afraid, wondering if anyone would step up. Jack finished. "So now I'm here. Not because I'm perfect, not because I'm special, but because someone needs to be. And I think that someone could be you." There was silence, then a clap, then another, until the room filled with something Jack hadn't expected. Not applause out of politeness, but conviction. People didn't just hear him. They believed him. That evening, Ava and Jack sat in the break room. The energy from the training session still buzzed in the air like static. "You were amazing," she said, sipping from a paper cup. "I didn't do it for a standing ovation." "I know. That's why it worked." Jack glanced at her. "You really think this can change anything?" Ava nodded. "Not everything, but enough. Enough to start tipping the scale." He looked down at his hands, rough and oil-stained. "I'm not corporate. You know that." She smiled. "Good. We've had enough of those. What we need now are people who live what they say, who carry kindness in their calluses." He chuckled. "That's poetic. I mean it." Her voice softened. "My entire life has been shaped by image, public perception. But the truth is, I spent a lot of it not trusting anyone to see the real me. I've sat in rooms filled with applause and felt completely alone." Jack met her gaze. "You weren't alone on that plane," he said. "No," she agreed quietly. "For the first time in a long time, I wasn't." The moment stretched between them. Not romantic, not yet, but charged with something deeper: recognition, respect, the kind of connection that can only come from standing in the ashes and choosing to build anyway. Ava stood. "Come on, let me show you something." They walked to the rooftop terrace of the Luma Air headquarters. The sky was the color of slate, but just at the horizon the sun was cutting through amber and gold, pouring between the clouds. She gestured to the view. This is what we fly above. All that storm, all that gray. And then, when you break through, this. Jack took in the light. I've flown through enough storms, he said quietly. But I've never seen it like this before. Ava looked at him, eyes soft. That's because sometimes it takes another set of eyes to remind us where the sky really begins. Jack said nothing, but in his chest something steady and warm took hold. He didn't know what it was yet, but he knew it was worth flying toward. The days that followed blurred into motion meetings, mock scenarios, late-night debriefs, coffee cups gone cold before they could be finished. Jack had never been in so many rooms with so many words flying around. People talked about vision branding, policy integration, and stakeholder synergy. Most of it sounded like wind to him, but every once in a while Ava's voice would rise through the noise, clear-measured and startlingly human. We don't change culture with checklists. We change it by how we treat people when no one's watching. It wasn't just lip service. She lived it. Jack watched her take time to learn everyone's names, ask about their families, remember who needed time off for their kids' dance recitals. It was subtle, but powerful. And yet, she remained just slightly out of reach. Professional, cordial, grateful, but always a step behind her own eyes, like she was carrying something too fragile to place down. Jack saw it most when they were alone after the sessions ended. She'd linger in the hallway or the rooftop terrace, always looking out at something invisible. That night, after a full day of back-to-back trainings, Jack stayed behind to stack chairs. The conference room smelled faintly of markers and old carpet. Ava appeared in the doorway, barefoot, her heels dangling from her fingers. "You don't have to do that," she said. He shrugged. Not much of a sitter. She hesitated, then stepped in. "You were quiet today. I talk more with wrenches." She gave a small smile. "Still thinking about what you said last week? About your daughter watching you?" "Always," he replied. "She's my compass." A pause. Then quietly Ava said, "I never had that." Jack looked at her. "I mean, I had people, parents, staff, expectations, but not someone I wanted to be better for. Not until recently." Jack set a chair down, slower now. "Emily?" She nodded. "And you." That hung in the air, surprising not in a romantic way, but in the way truth lands when it's been circling you for days. Ava crossed the room and sat on the edge of the stage heels, resting beside her. For a moment, she looked nothing like a CEO. She looked like a woman trying to unclench years of being everyone else's version of herself. "You ever feel like the whole world sees you and still doesn't see you?" she asked. Jack joined her, sitting a few feet away. "Every day after Megan died." She turned to him. "They said all the right things," Jack continued. "They offered casseroles, nodded solemnly, told me I was strong. But no one saw the nights I sat on the bathroom floor because Emily was asleep, and I didn't want her to hear me break." Ava didn't respond, but her eyes glistened. He added softly, "We all carry something. Doesn't mean we're meant to carry it alone." She looked down at her hands. "When I called off the engagement, it wasn't because I stopped loving him. It was because I realized I never really knew what love was. Not real love. Not love without strategy." She took a breath. He liked the version of me that fit beside him in photographs. I started to believe that was the only version of me worth keeping. Jack shook his head. "That's not who I saw." Her gaze met his. "I saw someone who was afraid and brave at the same time. Someone who could have yelled or run but stayed silent and still, and that takes strength." Ava's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't feel strong. I felt invisible." Jack leaned forward slightly. "You weren't. Not to me. Not to Emily." A tear finally slipped from the corner of her eye. And Jack didn't say anything more. He didn't offer a hug, didn't fill the silence. He just stayed. because sometimes presence is louder than words. Later that night, Jack returned home to find Emily curled up on the couch waiting for him. A blanket over her legs, a book in her lap. "You're late," she said sleepily. "I know," he said, kneeling beside her. "Want me to carry you to bed?" She shook her head. "Tell me something first." "Okay. What did you help someone today?" He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I think maybe I did." Emily yawned. "Good, because Mama said kindness is like rain. Even if you don't see where it lands, it still makes something grow." Jack froze, then pulled her into his arms. He thought about Ava, about what she said, what she didn't say, about the weight she still carried, the kind that didn't show in interviews or company bios. And he wondered what kind of world we might have, if more people simply sat with each other even when they didn't know how to fix the pain. The next morning, Jack arrived early at the terminal training gate. The sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was unusually clear, sunlight spilling across the tarmac like a promise. Ava was already there. No suit jacket, no laptop, just her, leaning against the glass. She turned when he walked in. "Good morning," she said, voice lighter than he'd heard it before. He nodded. "You sleep." She smiled. Enough. They stood together for a long moment, watching planes take off, soaring into skies they couldn't yet see. Then Ava spoke, her voice quiet but sure. "Let's keep building." Jack looked at her, the sunlight catching in her eyes. And he nodded, not just because he believed in the project, but because he believed in her, not the public figure or the CEO, but the woman who was still learning what it meant to be seen, and loved anyway. It was just after 9 when Jack heard the soft knock on the hangar office door. He looked up from the schematics he'd been reviewing for a maintenance order, expecting a supervisor or maybe one of the younger techs looking for advice. But it was Ava. She stood in the doorway in jeans and a navy blouse, her hair loose for the first time since he'd met her. The early light filtered through the skylights above her, catching dust motes in the air, framing her like a photograph paused in mid-breath. "Hope this isn't a bad time," she said. Jack set down the tablet and leaned back in his chair. "For you, never." She stepped inside, slowly glancing around the space. The hangar office was modest, old bulletin boards, a coffee maker that always brewed too strong, a faded photo of Jack and Emily tucked into the corner of his whiteboard. "I needed to get away from the glass walls for a bit," she said. "You've got insulation, tools, coffee that smells like it actually wakes people up." He grinned. "It's probably a health hazard, but yeah, it works." Ava sat in the chair across from him, arms folded but not closed off, more like she was holding something in. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. Jack nodded. "Of course." She hesitated. "When Megan died, how did you keep going?" The question landed softly, but its weight was real. Jack exhaled, slow and steady. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat. He'd lived with the answer too long for it to scare him now. "I didn't," he said quietly. "Not right away." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "For a while, I just moved. I got up, made breakfast, packed. Emily's lunch fixed what was broken at work, smiled when people needed me to. But inside, I was frozen. Like time moved around me and I was just watching." Ava's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. "What changed?" she finally asked. Jack tapped the edge of his coffee cup. "One night, Emily had a fever. Nothing dangerous, but high enough that she was scared. She woke me up crying and I held her. She kept saying, 'Don't leave like Mama did.' And it hit me, she doesn't just need a provider. She needs a whole person." He looked at Ava then. "So I decided to come back to life. For her. And for myself, eventually." She nodded, absorbing it. "I know that space you're talking about," she whispered. "That place where you keep moving, smiling, deciding things in meetings, but inside it's like you're still holding your breath." Jack tilted his head gently. "Are you still holding yours?" Ava let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Sometimes I forget I can exhale. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of shared stillness, like they were standing in the middle of a long hallway neither had known they'd been walking side by side. Later that day, Ava invited Jack to her office, not for business, but because she said there was something he needed to understand. "I don't let many people into this part of my life," she warned. Her private office was sleek and modern as expected, but tucked behind a decorative panel was something Jack hadn't imagined: a narrow door leading to a quiet room filled with personal artifacts. Old photos, journals, a piano softly lit by ambient light. "This was my mother's," Ava said, gesturing toward the piano. "She was the only person who ever believed I could lead without losing myself." Jack approached the keyboard. "Do you play?" Ava sat on the bench and touched the keys, letting her fingers rest on them like an old habit trying to remember its way home. "I used to. I stopped after she passed." Jack stood beside her. "Play something." She hesitated. "It won't be perfect. I don't care." Ava took a breath and began a slow, haunting melody, soft, unsure at first, then fuller as her hands remembered. It wasn't concert perfect, but it was real. And in that moment, Jack saw the layers peeling away. Not Ava, the CEO. Not Ava, the activist. Just Ava. When the music stopped, the silence lingered like an exhale that had waited years to be released. "I don't show this part of myself," she said quietly. "Not because I'm ashamed, but because I'm not sure people would understand." Jack met her eyes. "You don't have to show everyone. Just the people who matter." A pause. "Do I matter?" she asked, not like a challenge, but like someone testing hope for the first time. He didn't answer right away. He walked to her, knelt down beside the piano bench, and took her hand gently. "You do," he said. "More than I expected, more than I planned, but exactly as it should be." That evening, Ava sat alone in the piano room long after Jack had left. She read Emily's letter again. Then she pulled out a blank sheet of stationery and began writing back, addressed to Emily Callahan, Braveheart Castle, Anywhere. The letter said everything she hadn't spoken out loud: that she'd once believed love was transactional, that bravery looked like noise until a little girl and her father showed her it could be quiet and strong and kind, that kindness didn't just change policies, it changed people. She sealed the envelope. No stamp, but Jack would know where to take it. And across town, Jack stood outside Emily's bedroom door, listening to her hum herself to sleep. He didn't know where things with Ava would go, but for the first time in a long time, the silence inside him didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt full, filled with music, memory, and the sound of someone else finally learning to breathe. The flight was supposed to be routine. A mid-morning commuter route from Seattle to San Diego, 2 hours of in-flight service, a short layover, and a return flight by evening. Jack had agreed to ride along as part of Luma Air's new real-time training phase, where culture leaders observed and engaged directly with flight crews to spot areas of growth. He didn't mind. It felt more like returning to something familiar than stepping into something new. The tarmac, the boarding calls, the mechanical rhythm of the cabin. But something felt off the moment he stepped onto the aircraft. The flight attendant working the front cabin, Lydia, looked pale. New. Her smile strained at the edges as she welcomed passengers. Behind her, a uniformed captain, perhaps mid-50s, offered a firm nod to Jack before disappearing into the cockpit. Ava wasn't on the flight, but this was her vision in motion, her values, her voice, and Jack carried that with him. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the cabin had settled. A mother with twin toddlers had found mercy in an empty row. An elderly couple played a quiet game of gin rummy near the rear galley. Jack had taken a jump seat near the rear, clipboard in hand, pretending to take notes, but mostly watching. Then it happened. Seat 12A. A man in business attire snapped his fingers toward Lydia as she approached with the beverage cart. "No peanuts," he barked. "I fly this airline every month." "I'm sorry, sir," Lydia replied, her voice steady but thin. "We're peanut-free due to passenger allergies." Then get me something else salty, the man said, voice rising. And don't roll your eyes at me. Jack saw it. The moment. Lydia hadn't rolled her eyes. She had blinked hard, holding back emotion, not attitude. And yet the passenger twisted it, used it, weaponized it. Entitlement wrapped in false indignation. Jack stood. He didn't rush, didn't cause a scene. He walked calmly down the aisle and crouched beside Lydia just as she fumbled with a drawer of pretzels. "You okay?" he asked under his breath. She shook her head faintly. Jack rose and faced the passenger. "Sir," he said evenly, "you're welcome to express concern about service, but you're not entitled to insult someone doing their job." The man scoffed. "Who are you, her boyfriend?" "I'm with the executive training team," Jack said, voice steady. "And I'm here to make sure this airline treats everyone with dignity, including our crew." The cabin had quieted. Eyes were watching. The man shifted. She overreacted. "No, sir," Jack said. "She tried to serve you. You chose to belittle her. And that won't fly anymore, literally or otherwise." Lydia blinked again. This time it wasn't tears. It was gratitude. Jack turned back to her. "Take 5 in the galley. I'll finish the service." She hesitated, unsure. He nodded. "Go." She stepped away, and Jack picked up the tray. "Anyone else need pretzels?" he asked the row with a grin. Light laughter followed. The tension eased. The cabin breathed again. Back on the ground, a video surfaced. A passenger had filmed the entire exchange. By noon, it had over 200,000 views on a travel blog. By 4, Ava called. "You stole my thunder," she teased. Jack chuckled. "Wasn't trying to go viral. You didn't go viral. You went human. There's a difference." He heard something in her voice. Not amusement, pride, respect. Something warmer. "There's a press request," she continued. "Want to talk to a camera?" "No thanks," Jack replied. "I'd rather fix what's broken behind the scenes." "You fixed something very visible today," she said. "And you did it the right way." He paused. "I learned from someone." Ava's voice softened. "Who you?" There was a silence on the line, then a breath. "Can I come by tonight?" she asked. Yes. That evening, Ava arrived at Jack's apartment carrying a paper bag. "Dinner," she said, lifting it. "Tie. You look like a pad see you kind of man." He grinned. "And you look like someone who did not eat on purpose, so you could say that." She laughed, really laughed, and for a moment they were just 2 people in a cluttered kitchen setting plates, stealing bites of food between stories. Emily joined them halfway through dinner, sleepy-eyed in her unicorn pajamas. Ava knelt beside her. "I wrote you something." Emily blinked, then lit up. "A letter." Ava nodded. "Can I read it to you?" Jack watched from across the table as Ava unfolded the small envelope, the same one she'd sealed in her office days before. She read slowly, clearly. "Dear Emily, you may not remember what you said to me that night, but I will never forget it. You reminded me that quiet can still be strong, that kindness can come in the shape of a question, that sometimes the smallest people carry the biggest hearts. I hope you always ask hard questions. I hope you never stop believing your daddy is the bravest man on earth, because he is, and I hope one day I can be as brave as you were when you smiled at a stranger in the dark. With love, Ava." Emily hugged her without words. Jack turned away briefly, swallowing the lump in his throat. Later, after Emily had gone to bed and the dishes had been left for tomorrow, Jack and Ava stood on the tiny balcony outside. The city buzzed below a heartbeat of distant sirens' laughter and late-night traffic. "You didn't have to come," Jack said. "I did," Ava replied. "I needed to be reminded why this matters." He looked at her. "Do you ever doubt it?" She exhaled. "Only when I'm alone." Jack stepped closer. "You're not alone tonight." A pause, then with a voice just above a whisper she said, "I don't want to be." He took her hand, and for the first time not in boardrooms or briefings or branding efforts, but here in this quiet, unassuming space, They let the silence say what words couldn't. Not everything was fixed. Not everything needed to be. Because now they were flying with something new beneath them trust. The auditorium filled slowly. Not the kind of space built for drama or grandeur, but for function. Neutral walls. Comfortable chairs. A podium that had seen its share of slide decks and small talk. Today, however, it was different. This wasn't just a launch, it was a beginning. Ava stood backstage staring at the faint glow of the projection screen behind the curtain. Her speech was folded in her hand, but her fingers didn't grip it. She wasn't nervous about the words. She was nervous about the weight. The Safe Skies initiative was no longer an idea, it had become a movement. A wave she hadn't expected, all born from one quiet moment on a plane that no one else had seen, except for the man she hadn't been able to stop thinking about since. She peeked out to the crowd. There were reporters, yes, but also pilots in uniform, maintenance workers, flight attendants, customers who had written letters, survivors of in-flight harassment. Even a few faces she recognized from early staff meetings now seated with quiet reverence. And then there was Emily, front row, tiny legs dangling, her best dress smoothed carefully over her knees. Beside her, Jack. He hadn't worn a suit, just a navy button-down and dark jeans, but he stood straighter than any executive Ava had ever known. And when their eyes met, he didn't smile to impress. He smiled to encourage. Ava turned away and let out a slow breath. "You okay?" a voice asked softly behind her. It was Marcy, her assistant, and one of the few people who knew the full arc of Ava's transformation over the last 2 months. "I think so," Ava replied, "though I keep feeling like someone else should be doing this." Marcy tilted her head. "Funny. The board said the same thing. Until they heard you speak. You don't just sound like a leader anymore, Ava. You sound like someone who believes in something." Ava nodded once, then stepped into the light. The applause was warm but reserved as she approached the podium. Not celebrity applause, not obligation, respect. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't need to. "Thank you all for being here," Ava began, voice steady. "I know we come from different places, some of you from boardrooms, others from baggage bays, but today we sit in the same room because something unites us." She glanced briefly at Jack. Dignity. She continued not as a CEO, but as a woman who had finally stopped running from her own reflection. 2 months ago, I sat on a plane in silence while a stranger made me feel small. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I shrank. Because that's what too many of us have been taught to do. Shrink, apologize. Endure. A hush settled over the room. But then another stranger stood up. He didn't know my name. He didn't know my past, but he knew wrong when he saw it. And more importantly, he knew what right looked like. Jack looked down, modest, his thumb gently rubbing Emily's knuckles where her hand rested in his. Safe Skies isn't about a brand. It's about a choice. About teaching every employee, every passenger, every crew member, especially every young girl and boy watching us, that courage can be quiet and kindness can be loud. Her voice wavered for just a moment, then deepened with resolve. "I've spent years trying to build a name for myself. But that night I realized your name doesn't matter as much as your actions. Titles fade. Legacy is behavior." She paused. "Let the truth sit." And so to honor that truth, I want to introduce the newest part of this program. A scholarship fund. Not for executives. Not for prodigies. But for children of the invisible heroes in our system mechanics crew. Single parents who choose dignity every day without applause. There was a soft murmur. Surprise. Emotion. The first recipient of this fund is a girl who reminded me that you don't have to be loud to be strong. That sometimes the bravest people wear unicorn pajamas and hand you letters that become lifelines. She looked directly at Emily. "Emily Callahan, will you join me up here?" The little girl blinked, startled. Jack gently nudged her. She stood a little unsteady, then walked up the steps as the room filled with a soft, rising applause. Ava knelt. I never had a little sister, she said quietly. But if I did, I'd want her to be just like you. She handed Emily a simple certificate, a gold envelope, and hugged her gently. Emily whispered, I'm proud of you. Ava blinked back the emotion and whispered back, me too. Later, as the crowd filed out and reporters cornered executives for quotes, Jack and Ava stood near the stage together but not needing words. She told me you were going to cry, Jack teased gently. She told me you were going to squirm. Ava shot back. He shrugged. She wasn't wrong. They stood quietly watching Emily show her certificate to an airline captain. Then Ava turned. I meant every word. I know Jack said, I've stood on stages my whole life, she added. But this is the first time I felt like I was actually standing for something. Jack touched her hand, light but certain. You were. She smiled. And what about you? How does it feel to be the guy who changed a company without ever applying for the job? Jack chuckled. Exhausting. And, strangely, right. A pause. Then Ava stepped closer. I was terrified of being seen for a long time, she said. But now I think I'm more afraid of going back to being invisible. You won't, Jack said. Not anymore. The lights dimmed behind them as the stage crew began clearing the room. But neither of them moved. Because sometimes after a storm has passed, the silence that follows is sacred, not empty. Full of purpose, of possibility, of love just beginning to know its name. 6 months later, spring arrived like an overdue apology. In Seattle, that meant early dogwoods blooming along neighborhood streets, sunlight filtering through clouds with hesitant grace, and the rain still frequent but gentler somehow, as if even the skies were learning how to let go. Jack stood at the gate of a small regional airport in eastern Washington, clipboard in hand but his mind elsewhere. He wore the Navy flight training polo that had strangely become his second skin. Not a uniform, not quite a title, but a quiet symbol of everything that had changed since the day he stood up on that plane and never sat back down in the same way again. Gate 3 is all yours, the flight coordinator called. School group coming in. You're clear on the pre-board. Jack gave a nod, but his smile stretched beyond duty. Today wasn't about training new hires or reinforcing policy. It was something far more personal. Today was Ava's idea. A test run of Safe Sky's newest Venture Empathy flights, a program that paired experienced crew with first-time flyers from underserved communities. Jack had volunteered, not because he was assigned, but because he believed in it. Every line of it. And somewhere in the crowd of boarding passengers was the girl he'd once been the one who didn't know if flying was for people like her. Emily, now proudly serving as the youngest junior ambassador in the program, stood beside him with a clipboard of her own. She wore her Safe Skies lanyard like it was a crown. You nervous? Jack asked, glancing down. Emily rolled her eyes. Daddy, I've been on more planes than the principal of my school. Jack laughed. Okay, Captain Confidence. A pause. Then Emily looked up at him, her expression softening. Is she really flying in today? Jack knew who she meant. He nodded. Gate 7. Her meeting ran late, but she's connecting through here for the final leg. Emily grinned. So, is today the day? Jack raised a brow. What day? She gave him the kind of look only a child can give when they know something a grown-up thinks they've kept hidden. The day you finally ask her, she said. You know, ask her. Jack chuckled. And what if I get it wrong? Emily shrugged. You got it right the day you stood up for her. Everything since then is just extra credit. Before Jack could respond, the terminal's overhead chime sounded, and the gate attendant lifted her mic. Flight 738 inbound from San Francisco, now arriving at Gate 7. Jack's breath caught just for a second. She emerged 5 minutes later, rolling a sleek carry-on behind her, hair wind tousled from the jet bridge, but her eyes clear. Focused. Ava scanned the crowd. When she saw him, she didn't smile right away. Instead, she stopped, stared, as if rewinding every moment that led to this one, from the flight to the boardroom to the rooftop to the speech that changed everything. Then her face softened and she approached. "You're early," she said. "So are you." She leaned into him, her carry-on forgotten, and wrapped her arms around his middle. Not formal, not forced. Home. Emily raced over clipboard bouncing against her chest. "We're boarding in 20 Ms. Ava. That means you have exactly 7 minutes for one serious conversation and one snack." Ava knelt down, grinning. "What snack do you recommend? Banana chips," Emily said very seriously. "And heart stuff." Ava glanced up at Jack. "Heart stuff." Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "Apparently, that's our family phrase for talking about the big things." Emily nodded like a tiny sage. "So, do you have heart stuff to say?" Ava stood, looked at Jack. The terminal buzzed softly around them, boarding calls, suitcase wheels, distant laughter. But here between them was silence, thick with everything they hadn't yet said out loud. "I've spent most of my life flying solo," Ava said, voice even but tender. "It made me efficient, brave, careful, but it also made me lonely." She looked at Emily, then back at Jack. "And then you sat next to me without knowing who I was. You didn't try to save me. You just saw me. And you showed me that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it walks in quietly, offers a seat, and stays." Jack's throat tightened. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about everything. About Emily. About what we've built. And about how for the first time I don't want to rebuild alone." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a folded paper airplane. The kind Emily used to make for Ava in the early days of their friendship. But inside it, this time, was a ring. Simple, elegant, honest. Ava blinked eyes wide. "No cameras, no spotlights," Jack said. "Just me. Asking you if you'd like to share the rest of your flights with me." Emily gasped and clapped. Ava didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, took his hand in hers, and whispered, "Only if the seat is next to yours." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that small ordinary gate surrounded by strangers heading off to destinations unknown, something extraordinary took off. Not a jet, but them, together. Months later, a new aircraft in the Luma Air fleet bore the name Emily Grace. On the seatback pocket of every 24B there was a small laminated card that read, "Kindness begins with noticing. A struggling single dad got a midnight call by mistake. But she said, I needed you more than ever." The rain had come in sideways all evening, pounding the tin roof of the modest bungalow like an angry drummer. Liam Carter wiped his boots on the mat just inside the door and quietly locked it behind him. The clock above the mantel read 12:01 a.m. The living room was dim lit only by the soft glow of a vintage floor lamp and the flickering television screen now playing static. Emma had fallen asleep on the sofa, picture book still open in her lap, her cheeks flushed with sleep. He walked over, gently adjusted the blanket around her, and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. She stirred, but didn't wake. Liam paused there for a moment, watching her. She was the reason he kept going, the reason he kept breathing. He'd worked a double shift patching an emergency boiler leak in a rundown apartment block where the heating had failed. His fingers were cracked and raw from the cold, the tips still stained with rust and sealant. But it wasn't the work that tired him. It was the silence. The silence that used to be filled with laughter. With her voice. He reached for his phone, which sat charging on the kitchen counter. One missed call from a number he didn't recognize. He frowned. Wrong number, maybe. Then it rang again. Liam stared at the screen. Unknown number. The digital clock on the microwave read 12:04 a.m. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to ignore it. Nothing good ever came from a midnight call. But something in the timing and the strange stillness of the room made his hand move. He answered. There was silence, and then a soft breath. Fragile, unstable. A woman's voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call. I know I shouldn't." Liam blinked, confused. "It's all right. Who is this?" Another pause. Her voice was trembling now, raw and full of something he hadn't heard in a long time, desperation. "I thought I dialed someone else. I just needed to hear someone's voice. I'm sorry." He could have ended it there, could have said goodnight and hung up. But something in her tone caught him by the throat, a note of something brittle, like glass about to shatter. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She didn't answer, just let out a shaky breath. "I'm not okay," she whispered. "I'm not okay, and I don't know how to fix it anymore." Liam's breath caught. The room around him felt suddenly smaller. "You don't have to fix it all tonight," he said. "You just have to make it through tonight." There was silence, but she didn't hang up. "Where are you?" he asked. She gave a choked laugh. "I'm not going to jump off a building if that's what you're asking." He sat down at the kitchen table, his back aching. "That's not what I asked." She paused, and for the first time her voice steadied just barely. "I'm sitting in my car. I left a party. Everyone was laughing. I felt like I was watching strangers through glass. So I walked out." "You called the wrong number," he said quietly. Maybe she murmured. Or maybe I didn't. The rain continued tapping on the windows. Emma stirred again in her sleep, murmuring something inaudible. Liam glanced over and smiled just barely. Then his attention returned to the line. "I don't know who you are," she continued, "but your voice, it's calm, like you're someone who's used to holding things together when they're falling apart." He let that hang there for a moment. Then he said softly, "I lost someone. A long time ago. I learned how to sound steady. Doesn't mean I am." There was a soft sound, something like a sob, trying to stay hidden. "I don't want to go home tonight," she whispered. "Everything there reminds me I'm not enough. That I failed." Liam leaned forward, resting his elbow on the table, eyes fixed on nothing. "Whoever told you that lied," he said. "How would you know? Because I've been there. And the truth is, the only people who say you're not enough are the ones who fear they never were." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Liam." Another pause. "I'm Sophie." They didn't say anything else for a while, just listened to the sound of each other's breathing. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt held. Eventually, she said, "Thank you, Liam, for answering." And then, without warning, the call disconnected. Liam stared at the phone. His own reflection blinked back at him in the dark screen. He sat there a long time. Then he rose, walked over to the sofa, and kissed Emma's forehead. "Good night, baby girl," he whispered. And in the quiet, where once there had been nothing, there was now a name. Sophie, and a voice he couldn't forget. Liam didn't sleep that night. He lay on the couch across from his daughter, staring at the ceiling as the old radiator hummed quietly in the background. Outside, the rain had turned to a light mist drifting through the porch light like breath on a winter window pane. Sophie. That was all he had. A name, a voice, and 1,000 silent questions. He didn't know what she looked like. Didn't know where she lived, what she did for a living, or what had driven her to make that call. But none of it mattered. What stayed with him wasn't the details. It was the weight in her voice, the ache buried in every syllable. He knew that ache. He'd carried it himself. By morning, Emma was back to her bright-eyed self. She bounced around the kitchen in her pajamas, requesting blueberry pancakes with exactly 3 chocolate chips per side, a Carter family tradition. Liam, bleary-eyed but smiling, obliged. "Did you dream last night?" she asked, climbing into the chair across from him. He poured the batter and glanced at her. "Yeah, I think I did." "What about a woman in the dark?" he said, then paused, and a voice I couldn't forget. Emma tilted her head in that curious way she did when she was trying to understand something beyond her years. Did she say something scary? Liam flipped a pancake, letting the thought hang in the air. No, he said softly. She said something honest. That evening, after Liam tucked Emma into bed and turned out the light, he sat on the porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, listening to the quiet. The moon hung low, casting silver across the cracked pavement of the street below. The town was winding down, lights flicking off in windows, cars pulling into driveways. His phone buzzed just as he was about to set it down. Unknown number, 12:03 a.m. His heart thudded. For a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail, but he didn't. He swiped to answer. Hello. There was silence, then a breath. It's me again, she said, her voice low and cautious. I know I shouldn't have called. I couldn't stop thinking about last night. He exhaled slowly. Neither could I. A pause. Then quieter. I thought you wouldn't answer. I wasn't sure I would, Liam admitted, but I'm glad I did. She let out a small, almost nervous laugh. Me too. This time she didn't sound quite so broken. Still brittle, still guarded, but not splintering. There was a sliver of something in her tone. Hope, maybe. Or gratitude. They talked for 20 minutes. Not about anything profound, just little things. Favorite foods, books they'd once loved, songs they secretly cried to in the car. She still didn't offer her last name, or where she lived. And Liam didn't ask. Her identity wasn't the point. It was the connection that mattered. Over the next week, the calls became routine. Always at 12:04. Always just her voice, and his. He came to expect it, like the way dawn eventually follows night. No texting, no social media, no pictures. Just real-time, honest conversations that existed nowhere but in the space between them. Some nights were quiet, their words as sparse as stars. Other nights she cried, and he listened. He never tried to fix her. That was the key. He never offered solutions or platitudes. He didn't ask her to cheer up or stay strong. He just gave her space. And in that space, she breathed. I'm not used to this, she said one night. Being heard. Liam was quiet. You're not invisible. I feel it. Well, you're not. Not to me. Silence. Then she asked softly, Do you ever miss her? It was the first time she brought up his pain. He didn't hesitate. Every day. Sophie exhaled. How do you keep going? Liam looked at the stars overhead. I don't. Some days I stop. But then, Emma needs breakfast, or her shoelace breaks, or she wants to know why the moon follows our car. She laughed. Kids. Built-in purpose. Something like that. She was quiet for a long moment. Then said, almost like a prayer, I wish someone like you had answered my call a year ago. That same night, as Liam hung up and set the phone down, Gail, the elderly neighbor from next door, stepped out onto her porch, wrapped in a thick robe and slippers. You're out late, she called. Liam smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep. She squinted. You've been smiling more lately. Less haunted. He blinked, surprised. Have I? Gail stepped down one step. Arms folded. Don't let it scare you. Healing can feel like betrayal when grief is all you've known. Liam's throat tightened. It's not like that. I didn't say it was, she said gently. I'm just saying. It's okay. Even the quietest hearts deserve to be heard. He looked down at the phone, still glowing faintly in his palm. He didn't know where this was going. He didn't know who she was or what this would become, but something inside him had changed. He didn't feel numb anymore. He felt present. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. Sophie Bennett did not believe in fate. She believed in data. In performance metrics, quarterly reports, market shifts. That's how she had built an empire, by outworking, outlasting, and outsmarting. Feelings had always been an obstacle to strategy. Vulnerability was for people who had time to fall apart. And yet ever since the first night she accidentally called him Liam, Her world had begun to tilt in quiet, undeniable ways. She'd begun taking the long way home just to clear her head. She started drinking her tea without distraction, no longer drowning her thoughts in back-to-back conference calls. And worst of all, most dangerously of all, she found herself waiting for midnight. Waiting for his voice. That warm, grounded voice that never asked for anything. That never interrupted. That made her feel for the first time in years like she wasn't some malfunctioning machine. She felt like a person. Friday came heavy with clouds and an edge of frost in the air. Sophie arrived early at Bennett Media's downtown headquarters, a 20-story glass tower in the heart of the city. Her heels echoed against the marble lobby floor as she entered, nodding briefly at the security guard who greeted her like always. But nothing felt like always anymore. She walked with practiced confidence into the elevator, pressed the button for the executive floor, and stared at her reflection in the polished doors. Hair perfect. Lipstick unflawed. Not a line out of place. And yet she looked unfamiliar. Like someone pretending to be herself. The elevator stopped one floor early. The doors slid open and he was there. At first, Sophie didn't register him. Just another maintenance tech in a navy blue uniform toolbox and hand eyes scanning the wiring in the hallway junction box. Then their eyes met. Liam straightened slightly, his posture instinctively respectful. She was, after all, the CEO. But something flickered across his face. Something subtle. Recognition. Or maybe curiosity. Sophie's breath hitched. Her mind reeled. Could it be? He looked exactly like she had imagined. Not in appearance, but in presence. Solid. Calm. Not particularly polished, but real. Like a man who knew the weight of things and carried them anyway. She forced herself to step inside the elevator without hesitation, her heart suddenly racing. The doors closed. She stared at the panel. At the button for floor 20. But she didn't move. That was him. She knew it. But that couldn't be. Could it? That night, 12:04, came and went. No call. Liam sat on the edge of his bedphone and hand-thumb hovering over the screen. But he didn't call her. He'd seen her today. He was sure of it. The woman in the navy pantsuit. The CEO. Sophie. She hadn't said anything, but he'd seen the flicker in her eyes. She'd recognized him, too. Maybe not fully, but enough to cause tension in the air between them. Now he wasn't sure what to do. For weeks he'd known her only as a voice, a feeling, a shared silence in the dark. But now she was real, tangible. A woman with influence and power, and let's be honest, an entire life far removed from his. What was he supposed to say to her now? Hey, it's me, the guy from your midnight emotional unravelings. I was just fixing your building's lighting. He rubbed a hand over his face and sighed. Maybe this was the part where things broke. Maybe it was always meant to be anonymous, a brief rescue mission for two drifting souls, nothing more. Sophie sat in her luxury apartment light's dim glass of wine untouched beside her. Her phone rested on the coffee table like a loaded gun. She hated this feeling. Powerless, exposed. Like someone had peeled back her armor and she couldn't put it back on. Why hadn't he called? Was he scared? Embarrassed worse, was he disappointed? She stood abruptly, pacing the room, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Then, without giving herself time to second-guess, she reached for her phone. 12:22 a.m. She called. It rang once, then again. Hello? His voice was quiet, cautious. It's me, she said. I didn't think you were going to call tonight. I wasn't sure you'd want me to. Silence stretched. You saw me, she said, more statement than question. I think so, he replied. Did you? I did. Another pause. And now he asked. Sophie closed her eyes. Now I don't know how to pretend I don't know your face. Liam exhaled. It changes things. Yes, she said. Then added, voice trembling slightly, but I don't know if that's bad. Liam leaned back against the headboard, feeling something shift in his chest. Something open. I liked not knowing, he admitted. It made everything feel simpler. I didn't, she said, because now that I've seen you, I can't stop wondering if you'd still listen the same way knowing who I am. I would, he said immediately. I'd listen harder. That silenced her. Then, softly, I didn't expect someone like you to be standing in my hallway. You seemed too kind for this world. He chuckled. Kind doesn't pay rent. She laughed. It was short, but genuine. No, but maybe it saves people. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, You looked strong today. In control. That's the mask, she replied. The voice you hear at night, that's the real me. The one I try to bury in daylight. Liam's voice was steady. Then let's keep meeting at midnight, where the masks can fall. Sophie closed her eyes. I'd like that. They didn't speak much more after that, but both slept easier than they had in years. The following Monday arrived with the sharpness of winter returning. The air was crisp, the streets glistened with the residue of frost, and Liam found himself staring longer than usual at his reflection in the side mirror of his van before heading into work. He was scheduled for an early job routine maintenance on electrical junctions inside Bennett Media's corporate offices. Just like last week. Just like when he'd seen her. Her, Sophie. He hadn't spoken her name aloud since that last call. He wasn't sure what came next, if anything should. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. Not just her voice, but her poise. The way her eyes had locked with his for that split second. There had been recognition there. A flash of unease, or maybe curiosity. He couldn't tell. Liam had always been good at keeping things separate, compartmentalized. His grief in one boxwork and another fatherhood in its own sacred drawer. But Sophie, she'd slipped past all that. Somehow she'd become real in his world, and now nothing was neat anymore. Up on the 20th floor, Sophie was in her glass-walled office, staring blankly at her laptop. The numbers on the spreadsheet before her might as well have been hieroglyphs. Her assistant knocked lightly and entered without waiting. Ms. Bennett, the tech, is here to check the electricals on the west wing. Do you want him escorted? Sophie blinked. Is it the same guy as last week? I believe so. Liam Carter. Her breath caught in her throat. She covered it with a cough. No need to escort. Let him work. She waited until her assistant left before standing and walking slowly to the window. From there, she could see part of the hallway beyond the frosted glass. She watched the door across the floor open. Watched him step in. Same worn toolbox. Same calm gait. Same slight tilt of his shoulders as he scanned the panels on the wall. She didn't approach. She couldn't. Not yet. That night, Liam tucked Emma into bed, and as he turned off her nightlight, she spoke through a sleepy yawn. Did you talk to your lady friend today? He chuckled softly. What makes you think she's my lady friend? Emma sat up on one elbow, her curls tousled. You smile when her name is on your phone. Liam paused. He hadn't realized he'd smiled. Not in a long time. She's not exactly a friend, he said slowly. We just talk. Then maybe you should make her one. Emma mumbled, sinking back into the covers. Friends make people feel better, like how Mrs. Gale gives us cookies when you look tired. He laughed, walked over and kissed her forehead. I'll think about it. When 12:04 arrived, Liam was already holding his phone. It didn't ring. At 12:05, he gave in and called her. It rang 3 times. Hello. Her voice was breathless, not out of surprise, but anticipation. I wasn't sure if you'd call, she said. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to. I waited, she whispered, but I was afraid. I don't know what to say now that we've seen each other. You don't have to say anything. Yes, I do, Sophie said. I need to explain. Liam sat down the line between them, stretching with tension. I've never called a stranger before, she began. Never opened myself up like that. But I was breaking. And then your voice. She paused. It felt like the only real thing I'd touched in months. He stayed quiet, letting her speak. And now I know who you are, what you do, where you stand when you're not just a voice in the dark." He took a breath. "And I don't know how to handle that," she said honestly. "You're grounded, steady, and I feel like I'm one crisis away from shattering in public. You think I don't feel the same." Liam's voice was calm but edged with emotion. "You think I haven't had to hold my daughter in one hand and my sanity in the other." The line was silent. I wasn't trying to pretend, he continued. I just didn't want to ruin what we had by dragging it into daylight. Sophie's voice softened. "Maybe we're just scared that something good can't survive outside the dark." Liam let that sink in. Then he said, "I'd still listen. Whether you were a CEO or a stranger in the night, I'd still care." A shaky exhale. "Why?" "Because you never asked me to be anything but human. And that's a rare gift." There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to be anyone else anymore, Liam." "Then don't," he said. "Let the mask fall. I'll still be here." The next morning, Sophie walked into her building, passed through the lobby like she always had, but this time her gaze flicked toward the maintenance desk. He wasn't there, and for the first time in weeks, she missed him in daylight. That same morning, Liam found a note tucked under his toolbox in the garage, hand-delivered by courier. It read, "I've decided not to run anymore. If you're ever ready to meet me under the sun, I'll be in the lobby. No mask, no name. Just me. S." He stared at the paper heart pounding not out of fear but anticipation. For the first time in years, someone wasn't walking away from the broken parts of him. They were walking toward them. The lobby of Bennett Media was a cathedral of glass and steel shiny surfaces, high ceilings, and cold air conditioning that hummed like distant wind. Sophie stood near the large, curved window facing the street, dressed not in her usual blazer, but in a soft cream sweater and jeans. Casual, unassuming, like someone trying for once to just be enough. The receptionists gave her curious glances. She never loitered. She never arrived without a meeting. She ignored them. She was waiting. The seconds ticked past noon, and for a moment doubt crept in like a cold draft. Maybe he wouldn't come. Maybe she'd ruined something that had only worked because it wasn't real. Then the front doors slid open. Liam stepped inside, toolbox in hand, wearing his standard navy workshirt sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. His boots tracked melted snow behind him, and his hair was still damp from the wind outside. Their eyes locked. Everything else vanished. No marble, no glass, no cold. Just the two of them, one woman shedding the weight of control, and one man carrying the quiet strength of survival. Liam slowed his pace but didn't stop. Sophie stepped forward. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He returned a small, cautious smile breaking across his face. "You came. You asked." They stood awkwardly for a moment, surrounded by a world that didn't quite know what to do with them now that they'd stepped into it together. Sophie took a breath. "I don't know what this is, or what it's supposed to be. Me neither. But I don't want to go back to pretending," she said. "Not after everything we shared in the dark." Liam nodded. "We don't have to pretend, but we can take it slow." She smiled. "Slow's good." Just then the elevator dinged behind them and broke the moment. Liam glanced toward the sound. "I have a maintenance call on 16. Sophie gestured toward the cafe off the lobby. "Then, maybe. After I'll be here. No mask. Still me." He tilted his head slightly. "That's the version I like." And then he left, simple as that, but something in her chest felt profoundly changed. She didn't feel alone. Not anymore. That night, 12:04 came and went. No call, but neither of them reached for their phone. Some things were no longer needed in the dark. The next day, a soft knock echoed on Sophie's office door. Her assistant popped in. "Ms. Bennett, there's a little girl here asking for you. She says she knows your name from bedtime stories." Sophie blinked. "A what?" Before she could ask more, a small figure slipped past the doorframe. "Hi," said Emma Carter. a burst of energy wrapped in a lavender parka and glittered sneakers. She clutched a paper envelope crinkled at the corners and beamed up at Sophie like they'd been pen pals for years. Sophie stepped out from behind her desk. Emma. "My dad didn't know I was doing this," Emma said conspiratorially. "I asked Mrs. Gale to walk me here after school. She knows you're nice." Well, thank you. That's very brave of you." Emma held out the envelope. "I wrote something. For you." Sophie took it gently and opened it. Inside was a drawing in crayon stick figures, one taller with brown scribbles for hair, another with wavy lines and high heels, and a little girl in the middle holding both their hands. Above it was a big blue sky, and in uneven letters, "I think we all need stars, even grown-ups." Sophie's breath caught. Emma looked up at her, eyes wide and sincere. "You helped my dad smile again. I thought maybe he helped you too." Sophie knelt slowly. "He did, Emma. He really did." "Then maybe you shouldn't just talk at night," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Maybe you should go look at stars for real. With him." Sophie laughed softly, blinking away the sting behind her eyes. "You're wise for someone who still eats cereal with marshmallows." Emma grinned. "Daddy says I get it from Mom, but I think I just watch people." Sophie reached out, brushing a curl behind the girl's ear. "You're going to be something special, Emma. You already are." Emma shrugged. "You are too. You just forgot." That evening, Liam opened the front door to find Gail holding Emma's hand, a knowing smile on her face. "Before you say anything, yes, I walked her safely, and yes, I had permission from her teacher." Emma skipped into the house as if she hadn't just given a corporate CEO an emotional epiphany. Gail leaned in, eyes twinkling. She drew Sophie a picture. Said it needed to be done. Liam exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. "Did she?" "She did. And I have to say, your kid's got taste. That woman looked like someone who could run the world, but just needed a reason to slow down." He laughed, shaking his head. She's something." "So are you," Gail said. "Don't let your past trick you into thinking you can't be part of something new." He didn't answer, but he looked toward the kitchen where Emma was humming and setting the table for two, and he thought, just maybe the old woman was right. Later that night, Liam received a text. It wasn't from an unknown number. "Sophie, your daughter thinks we need to look at the stars. Want to take her advice?" Liam stared at the screen, heart pounding softly in his chest. Not fear this time, but hope. He typed back, "Liam, only if you promise to show up as you. No masks, just the woman I've been waiting to meet." They met under the stars 2 nights later. Not at a fancy rooftop or candlelit patio, but in Liam's modest backyard where a rickety lawn chair and a wool blanket became their corner of the universe. The air was cool, and a faint scent of pine drifted in from the woods nearby. Emma had gone to bed early after insisting that Sophie take the good chair and whispering to her dad that she'd already brushed her teeth twice. Sophie looked up at the constellations overhead. "I forgot how quiet it is out here." Liam chuckled. "That's because you spend your nights in a glass tower." She smiled but didn't look at him. "It's strange. The city makes you feel important." But silence. "It makes you feel honest." He glanced at her, then noticing how different she looked in the dim backyard light. Not polished, not powerful, just real. "That's why I sit out here sometimes," he said, "to remember what's underneath the noise." She nodded, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. "I've built a life on noise." Liam turned his eyes to the sky. Then maybe it's time to listen to the quiet. For a few minutes they sat in companionable silence, broken only by the creak of a tree branch in the wind and the hum of faraway traffic. Then Sophie spoke, almost in a whisper. "Do you ever feel like you're pretending?" she asked. "Like you're performing what people expect of you instead of just being?" He didn't answer right away. Then, every day, At least until about 8 to 10 p.m. when Emma asks me to help brush her unicorn's hair, and I remember I'm just a dad trying to survive." Sophie laughed, and it was a sound Liam wished he could bottle. It wasn't refined or delicate, it was unguarded. "I think I envy that," she said. "That your life has something pure in it. Something that doesn't want anything from you but your presence." He glanced at her. "Maybe you're just around people who forgot how to want the right things." She looked down, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. "That includes me." "No," Sophie Liam said gently. "You called at 12:04 because a part of you remembered who you are, past the CEO, past the image. That part of you is still there. You're just learning to listen to her again." She didn't speak, but her eyes shimmered under the stars. And for a while, that was enough. But even the most honest nights have a morning after. The next week, Sophie sat at the head of the long executive boardroom table. Her hair was pinned up her blouse immaculate, her words sharp. Around her were 8 men and women in expensive suits, but not one of them looked at her the way Liam had. And that terrified her. Because for the first time in her life, she didn't want to impress them. She wanted to be known. But the room didn't allow for that. Not in this world. Not in this company she'd built with sweat and perfection. She could feel herself slipping back into the persona, the voice, the armor. George, her longtime COO and trusted lieutenant, leaned forward mid-meeting. "There's buzz around your little visitor in the lobby last week. One of the junior PR guys saw you talking to a maintenance contractor. Is that something I should be concerned about?" Sophie's jaw tightened. "He's a friend." George arched a brow. "From what part of your world?" Her silence was its own kind of answer. George exhaled, voice lowering. "You have a reputation to protect. Personal stories get out, especially when they don't fit the narrative. And we both know the press will twist any crack in the armor." Sophie looked down at the table at the pen in her hand, at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized anymore. After the meeting, she walked past her office and kept going straight to the elevator, straight to the lobby, straight into the open air. That night, Liam waited for her. Not at 12:04. At 8:30, with hot chocolate and an extra blanket, watching the stars and listening for footsteps that never came. At 9:30, he checked his phone. No text, no voicemail. By 10:15, Emma wandered out in her pajamas. "She's not coming?" she asked sleepily. Liam shook his head. "Not tonight." Emma climbed into his lap, curling under his arm like a kitten. "Maybe she's scared." "Of what?" "Of liking us." Liam stared out into the night. "Maybe." Emma's breath slowed as she drifted off warm and small against him. He looked up at the sky, the same stars overhead. But tonight they felt farther away. Sophie didn't call that night, or the next. At the end of the week, Sophie found herself back in her office, staring at the framed magazine cover on her wall. Bennett Media's Woman of the Year. But all she could see was what wasn't in the frame. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't real. The version of her that sat under stars in a backyard sipping cocoa and laughing at unicorn hair was missing entirely. And she missed that version of herself more than anything. Later that night, alone in her car on a side street 2 blocks from Liam's house, she stared at her phone. She didn't dial. Instead, she whispered into the silence of her car, "I'm not okay, but I still want to try." The wind had picked up just after midnight, rustling the branches outside Liam's window. He lay in bed, one arm behind his head, the other resting across his chest phone inches from his hand. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed into you rather than offered rest. He hadn't heard from Sophie in 5 days. Not since that last night she'd promised to meet under the stars. He'd told himself he wouldn't call her, that she needed space, that maybe she'd slipped back into her old life, into the fortress of corner offices and curated perfection. But that didn't make the ache any less. He closed his eyes. And then, as if summoned by the beat between 2 heartbeats, the phone rang. Not a message, not a voicemail, a call. 12:04 a.m. Liam sat up breath-catching and answered without looking. "Hello?" There was a pause, a breath, and then her voice soft and frayed at the edges. "I didn't know if you'd answer." He swallowed hard. "I wasn't sure you'd call." "I almost didn't," she whispered. "I parked outside your street 3 nights ago. I watched your porch light go out. I couldn't get out of the car." Liam's chest tightened. "You were here. I couldn't face you," she admitted. "Not after disappearing like that." "Why did you—" Sophie didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice cracked. "Because I'm scared of what it means when someone sees me without the mask and stays." Liam leaned forward, fingers pressing into the blanket. "You don't have to be perfect for me to stay, Sophie. That's easy for you to say. You're grounded, real. You've lost things and survived. I've just hidden." Liam exhaled slowly. "You think I didn't hide after Claire died?" She stilled. "Claire, my wife," he said quietly. "It's been 3 years. Car accident. Emma was only 3. I hid in silence and work and keeping just busy enough not to feel the emptiness. I know what it's like to be afraid of being seen." Sophie's breath hitched. "I didn't know. I never told you. Not because I was protecting myself, but because I didn't want you to feel like you had to carry my pain, too. I wish you had told me." He smiled sadly. "I just did?" Silence settled between them, not heavy but full. Then Sophie said, "I lost someone too. My dad. A year ago. He was the only person who made me feel like I didn't have to be impressive to be loved. When he died, Brent, my fiancé, left. Said I wasn't myself anymore, but the truth is, I didn't know who that was to begin with." "Was that the night you called me?" "Yes," she said. "I left a gala. Everyone was laughing and networking and being important. I felt like I was screaming into a soundproof room. So, you picked up the phone. I didn't mean to call you. I meant to call the grief hotline. But I misdialed." Liam's throat tightened. "And still, we talked." "We did more than talk," Sophie whispered. "You reminded me I was still human, that I hadn't completely disappeared." Liam's voice was soft. "You were never gone. You just forgot how to come home." Another pause. Then, through a shaky breath, Sophie said, "Liam, I don't know what this is, but I miss you, not just your voice. You." He let her words settle raw and sincere. The woman who once spoke with polished power was now just a woman who wanted to be loved without conditions. "I miss you too," he said. "And I don't need to define this, but I do want to keep building it." "I'm not good at building," she said, almost apologetically. "You don't have to be." "I've got the tools," he replied with a gentle smile in his voice. Sophie laughed, the sound small but warm. That was terribly corny, and completely true. They were quiet for a long moment, each absorbing the presence of the other in the safest space they knew, not the daylight, not the roles they wore, but the fragile place between midnight and dawn. Then Sophie asked, "Can I come over?" Not tonight, but soon Liam's heart beat faster. Anytime he said, "The porch light stays on for a reason." The next morning, Liam found Emma at the breakfast table with her cereal and her coloring book. She looked up with sleepy eyes. "Did she call?" He paused, surprised. "How'd you know?" Emma shrugged. "Because you're smiling again." Liam ruffled her curls. "She might visit soon." Emma grinned. "Then I better draw her something better than a stick figure this time." Elsewhere in the city, Sophie stood in front of her bathroom mirror, wiping away the last smudge of mascara from eyes that had wept, not from sadness, but from release. She looked at herself, not as a CEO, not as a woman who'd been left, not as a voice in the dark, but as someone coming back into her own skin. She pulled out her phone and typed a message. "Thank you for waiting in the silence. I'm ready to be seen now." She hit send. Then she stepped into the sunlight. The invitation wasn't extravagant. No formal letter, no catered setting. Just a simple text from Sophie Company Gala this Saturday. "Come as you are. Bring Emma if she wants. I'd like you to see my world. Not to impress you, to share it. Liam stared at the message for a long time. He read it twice, then again. He wasn't a gala man. He didn't own a suit. He hadn't shaken hands with men in ties since his military discharge, and even then the handshakes felt more like contracts than connection. Still, the tone of her message was gentle, honest, not a test, an invitation. That night, over dinner, he asked Emma, "You remember Sophie's company?" Emma looked up from her plate of spaghetti, the building with the shiny floors. "That's the one. She sent us an invitation. They're having a big party Saturday night." Emma's eyes widened. A party with real napkins and music, something like that. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Will there be dancing?" Liam smiled. "Possibly." Emma grinned. "Then you can't say no." On Saturday, Liam stood in front of the bathroom mirror, awkwardly adjusting the collar of a borrowed blazer. Gail had found it in her late husband's closet, swearing it still had charm left in the seams. The sleeves were a touch long, but the shoulders fit. He smoothed his hair, exhaled, and stepped into the living room. Emma gasped like she'd just seen Superman step off the page. "Daddy, you look like a movie star." He laughed, slightly red. "You think so?" She nodded, clutching her tiny clutch purse. "Sophie is gonna faint." "Let's hope not." The Bennett Media Gala was held at the Downtown Art Museum, a breathtaking venue with glass ceilings and soft lighting that made the paintings shimmer like reflections on water. As Liam entered, with Emma, he felt every pair of eyes flick toward him. Not with malice, but with curiosity. The man in worn dress shoes. The man holding the hand of a little girl in sparkly sneakers. He almost turned back, but then he saw her. Across the gallery floor, Sophie stood beneath a suspended sculpture of cascading lights, wearing a simple dark blue dress that caught the room like moonlight in motion. She wasn't holding a wine glass. She wasn't networking. She was waiting. And the moment she saw them, her face changed, not for show, but for real. She smiled, and it reached her eyes. She walked toward them, her steps deliberate but unhurried, as though she was walking toward the most important decision of her life, and had already made it. "Hi," she said, kneeling in front of Emma. "You must be the one who gives the best advice." Emma nodded. "I told Daddy you were worth showing up for." Sophie laughed, glancing up at Liam. "She's not wrong." Then she stood. The room seemed to fade. Liam offered a hand. "You look real," she finished teasing, "but soft." "Yes, and beautiful." She took his hand. "You ready to meet my world? I'm more interested in meeting the version of you that lives behind it." That stopped her, just for a beat. Then she leaned in and kissed his cheek. "Come on," she whispered. "I want you to see what I've built, then tell me what I might have missed." Over the next hour, Liam met her colleagues, her board, her assistant, who eyed him with barely veiled surprise, and a man in glasses named Jonathan, who asked pointedly, "So, you're the guy?" "The guy?" Liam asked. Sophie answered, "The one who answered when I needed someone most." Jonathan blinked, then offered a respectful nod. Emma, meanwhile, stole the show, complimenting a woman's shoes, eating a mini cupcake in one bite, and asking a violinist how long it took to learn to make feelings come out of strings. But the real moment came when Sophie stood on stage to address the room. She spoke clearly, confidently, but not polished, not scripted. As most of you know, she began this year has been one of change for me personally and for the company. What you may not know is that the most valuable thing I've gained this year didn't come from strategy or sales. She paused. The room stilled. It came from a phone call. A wrong number, actually. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. I called in the middle of a panic attack thinking I was reaching a hotline. But the man who answered wasn't a professional. He was a father, a widower, a stranger who chose to stay on the line not because it was his job, but because it was his nature. She looked directly at Liam. Since then, I've come to believe that true success isn't what we build for the world, it's who we become when no one's watching, and who we choose to stay with when the lights are low. There was a hush then, quiet, genuine applause. Emma tugged Liam's hand. She means you, Daddy." "I know," he said, voice thick. After the speech, as people mingled and music filled the hall again, Sophie returned to them. Liam met her eyes. "That was brave." "No," she said. "That was honest. I think I've spent my whole life chasing applause, but tonight I just wanted to be known." And now he asked. She reached out, fingers brushing his. "Now I want to see what it feels like. To build something that doesn't need to impress anyone." He looked down at her hand, then at Emma, spinning in circles under the twinkle lights. He squeezed Sophie's hand. "Then let's build it." On Monday morning, Sophie stepped into the executive elevator of Bennett Media with a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. The kind that doesn't come from victory or strategy, but from waking up and knowing she no longer had to perform to be worth loving. She wore no jewelry, no designer heels, just a tailored navy suit and a quiet kind of confidence. The gala had gone better than she could have imagined. Her words, raw and unscripted, hadn't just landed, they'd settled into the hearts of the people who mattered most. And Liam. He had stayed by her side through it all, not as her statement, but as her anchor. But as the elevator doors opened to the 20th floor, Sophie felt the shift before she saw it. George was already waiting by her office door. The look on his face wasn't rage. It was worse control, wrapped in politeness. "Good morning," he said evenly. Sophie met his eyes. "George, do you have a moment?" He gestured toward the glass-walled conference room where 3 board members waited inside, their expressions unreadable. Sophie hesitated. "Sure." Inside, George closed the door and turned, hands clasped like a lawyer preparing to present his case. "I'll get right to it," he said. "There's been talk after the gala." About what Sophie asked, voice steady. "About you, about your speech, about the man you brought." Sophie didn't flinch. "Liam." George gave a tight smile. "Yes." "Liam, the working-class contractor you described as the man who saved you. That's what happened." One of the board members, a woman named Diana, leaned forward. "Sophie, it was a lovely speech, but it's raised questions, concerns." "Concerns," Sophie repeated. George nodded. "Shareholders are wondering if your personal entanglements are beginning to cloud your professional judgment. You're seen as the face of Bennett Media, and your face has always been polished, aspirational." Sophie inhaled deeply. "And now it's human. That's the problem, isn't it?" Diana exchanged a glance with another member. "You know how perception works in our industry. Your identity has value. That value must be protected. And if I choose to protect what's real instead of what's marketable?" Sophie asked calmly. George tilted his head. "We're not saying you can't have a personal life, but when it becomes the headline, when it challenges the narrative, then we have to talk about optics, about the brand." Sophie stood still, but inside her something cracked. Not from the criticism, but from the realization they didn't see her. They saw what she'd built for them. And now that she wanted to be herself, she was a threat. She thought of Liam, of Emma spinning beneath museum lights, of laughter on a back porch and silence that healed. She looked George in the eye. "I won't apologize for being a person, for loving someone who reminds me who I am when the noise stops." "Sophie," George began, but she raised a hand. "If that's unacceptable to the board, then let's be clear about it. I won't pretend anymore. I won't hide the parts of me that make me whole." No one spoke, so she turned and walked out. That evening she didn't wait for 12:04. She called Liam at 7:46. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said. And though she wanted to be strong, the tremor in her voice gave her away. "I had a meeting this morning," she began, "with the board." "What happened?" he asked gently. "They told me that being with you, being myself, puts the company at risk." Silence. Then Liam's voice, soft but sure. "Do you believe that?" "No," she said. "I believe that I finally said something real, and the people who benefited from my mask got scared." He didn't speak right away. When he did, it wasn't with reassurance. It was with truth. "You don't have to choose me," he said, "but you shouldn't have to choose against yourself." That stopped her cold. She blinked into the quiet of her car parked outside the grocery store. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "You're doing what no one ever taught us to do," he said. "You're choosing wholeness over performance." Tears blurred her vision. "Why are you so steady when I'm falling apart?" He laughed softly. "Because I've fallen apart before. I know what it sounds like when the pieces start to fall into place instead of away." 2 days later, Sophie stood at the head of the conference table again. Same board, same polished glass. But this time she brought a folder. Inside it, her resignation. Not a protest. Not a failure. A reclaiming. "I'm proud of what I built," she told them. "But if the cost of leadership is losing myself, then it's too high. This company deserves a face that's unshakable. I deserve a life that's unfiltered." Diana opened her mouth to protest. George didn't speak. Sophie smiled. "Thank you. For the years. And for the clarity." That night, she walked up the path to Liam's front door with Emma's drawing in her purse and peace in her step. Liam answered before she could knock. She smiled. "I quit today." He raised a brow. "You okay? I've never been more okay," she said. Then added, "Do you still have that porch light on?" He stepped aside, voice warm. "It's always been for you." The next morning, the sun spilled golden light over the kitchen counter where Sophie stood, sleeves rolled, flipping pancakes. She didn't need to. Liam was more than capable of making breakfast, but she insisted. Something about finally choosing this life made her want to live inside it. Emma sat at the table humming to herself as she drew another galaxy of crayon stars. Liam leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching the scene with a quiet wonder he didn't dare speak aloud. "You always this domestic," he teased. Sophie glanced over her shoulder. "Only when I'm nervous." "What for?" She smiled faintly. "Because this feels real. And real is terrifying." He walked over gently, took the spatula from her hand and replaced it with a cup of coffee. "Then, let's be terrified together." They spent the day like a slow-breath library, books and errands, a trip to the farmer's market where Emma charmed every vendor, and an afternoon walk down by the river where Sophie kicked off her heels and waded barefoot with Emma, laughter echoing under the trees. As the sun began to dip, they returned home and sat on the porch wrapped in old blankets, sipping tea as evening came. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Sophie admitted softly. Liam nodded. "That's the problem with survival mode. Even when you're safe, your body doesn't believe it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "So, what do? We keep showing up, until the fear runs out of breath." She smiled against his shirt. "That's poetic. That's exhaustion." He chuckled. "Poetry's a side effect." Later that evening, Emma was fast asleep with a flashlight still glowing under her blanket fort, and Liam stood in the backyard staring up at the stars alone. Sophie stepped out quietly, wrapping her arms around herself as the cool air brushed her skin. "Thought you disappeared on me," she said. "I was giving the stars a chance to show off before you came out and stole the spotlight." She rolled her eyes but smiled. "You always this charming. Only when I'm in love," he said so gently it didn't feel like a grand gesture. Just truth spoken plainly. Sophie stilled, not because she was unsure, but because for the first time those words didn't bring fear. They brought peace. She stepped closer. "Say it again." He turned to face her eyes, calm. "I'm in love with you." She took a breath. "Then I guess I should say it too." "You don't have to." "I want to." She touched his face. "I'm in love with you, Liam Carter. Not the voice in the dark. Not the man I imagined. You. The man who listens when no one else knows what to say. The father who gives his daughter stars when she asks for cereal. The man who doesn't fix me, but lets me fix myself." A long silence passed between them. But it wasn't empty. It was full of history, of healing, of hope. Then Liam looked up. "Dance with me. Sophie blinked. There's no music. He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped a playlist. A soft acoustic melody began to float into the night, gentle guitar, a voice like old velvet. "Now there is," he whispered. He held out his hand, and Sophie stepped into his arms. They swayed beneath the stars, surrounded by crickets and the faint hum of porch lights. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Inside the house, Emma peeked out from her blanket fort, watching from the window with a sleepy smile. She whispered to herself, "They found it." Then she turned off her flashlight and curled deeper into her blankets, secure in a world that finally made sense. A few days later, Sophie stood at a podium, not at a press conference, but at a quiet event hosted by a local nonprofit dedicated to mental health awareness. She was no longer CEO. She wasn't there in stilettos or designer labels. She was there in flats, jeans, and her truth. Behind her, on a banner, were the words, "The 1204 Foundation," because someone always needs you most in the dark. Sophie looked out at the modest crowd and smiled. "Many of you know I left the corporate world recently. Not because I failed, but because I realized success without soul is just performance. This foundation was born from a wrong number at the right time, from a conversation that saved me when I didn't think I deserved to be saved, and from a man who stayed on the line when he didn't have to." She turned, and Liam stood at the edge of the crowd, Emma holding his hand. Both were beaming. "This foundation," Sophie continued, "is for anyone who has ever felt invisible at midnight, and for the strangers who choose to see them anyway." That night, back on the porch, as the clock inched toward 12:04 a.m., Liam glanced at his phone. It didn't ring. Instead, Sophie placed her hand over his. "You don't have to wait for the call anymore," she said. "Why?" "Because I'm already here." The seasons shifted quietly. Winter surrendered to spring, and with it came softer mornings, children's laughter in the park again, and evening skies blushing pink instead of gray. Life, Liam found, didn't announce healing like a thunderclap. It returned in whispers, small routines, familiar laughter, a home that finally felt full again. The house once shadowed by memory now bloomed with life. Sophie had moved in gradually, not with fanfare, but with toothbrushes, shared calendars, and the unmistakable scent of her coffee blend. Her shoes by the door, her laugh in the kitchen, her presence not loud but known. Emma had taken it all in stride, as children do when love walks in gently. She began calling Sophie my person at school, then bonus mom, in whispered goodnights. She asked questions like, "Do you think the stars miss us when it's cloudy, and will we still be together when I'm a grandma?" To both, Sophie had answered without hesitation, "Yes, always." One weekend afternoon, Sophie sat at the dining table with Emma, a cup of tea steaming beside her while Liam fixed a loose door hinge nearby. "What are you working on, Em?" Sophie asked. Emma held up a folded paper booklet with a crayon-drawn cover, Our Family Story, by Emma Carter. Inside were stick figures, bright colors, and short sentences scrawled in big, careful letters. Sophie flipped to the second page. It read, "My dad was sad." Then he talked to a lady in the phone. She was sad, too. Then they talked, and they were not sad. Then they hugged. Then we had pancakes. She smiled, blinking away sudden tears. "This is beautiful." Emma grinned. "It's for school. My teacher said stories help people remember." Sophie turned to the last page. "Now we are happy. I have a real home. And at night, nobody cries alone." Sophie reached out and pulled Emma into her lap. "You are going to change the world someday, sweetheart." "I already did," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I helped you both stop being scared." Liam, overhearing from across the room, placed his screwdriver down and walked over. He kissed Emma's forehead and met Sophie's eyes over her shoulder. "She's not wrong," he said. That evening they sat together on the back porch, a ritual now deeply rooted in their lives. The stars were bright, and the air smelled faintly of new grass and lilac. "I never told you something," Sophie said quietly. Liam turned to her. "That first night, the reason I misdialed, The last number of the grief hotline was a 4. I pressed a 3. "Close, miss," he said. Or, "Perfect, miss," she corrected, because the person who was supposed to answer did. He took her hand. "Some calls aren't wrong. They're meant to find the one who's been listening all along." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You still keep the porch light on." "Always," he said. "But now it's not for someone who's lost." She looked up. "Then who is it?" For he kissed her temple. "For everyone who finds their way home." A few weeks later, the 1204 Foundation held its first full community event, a Starlight storytelling night for families coping with grief, mental health challenges, and quiet loneliness. The auditorium was modest, filled with folding chairs, soft lamps, and warm voices. Liam stood at the back helping organize refreshments while Sophie welcomed guests. Emma was the first one to step onto the little stage. She wore her favorite yellow dress and clutched her story booklet. "My name's Emma," she said into the microphone, "and I want to tell you something real." The room quieted. "A long time ago, my daddy was sad, and a lady was sad, and they didn't know each other. But one night they found each other just by listening. They didn't even know names yet. Just feelings. And then they got brave." She smiled wide. "Now we have a home. Not a house. A real home. And I want other people to know it's okay to be the one who calls. And it's okay to be the one who answers." There was not a dry eye in the room. After the event, as they packed up chairs and folded tablecloths, a man approached Liam, middle-aged with tired eyes and a voice as soft as gravel. "I lost my son last year," the man said. "Tonight was the first time I've heard someone say something that didn't feel like pity. Just truth." Liam nodded. Sometimes truth needs a quiet place to land. The man shook his hand. "Thanks for building one." That night at 12:04 a.m., Liam's phone didn't ring. It hadn't in months. And yet he found himself glancing at it. Not in fear, not in sadness, but in gratitude. Because 12:04 had once been the loneliest moment of his life,